94% of the genes that express autism are developed prenatally, and it's heavily genetic. And these are things that vaccines, one, the baby's going to get vaccinated after birth. So that's just an entirely insane thing to even say. And that's kind of why I think they backed off of that and tried to pivot to Tylenol. But then Tylenol is also just a really dumb thing to point at too. Once they removed mercury from these vaccines, once they also removed like aluminum, they removed a lot of these adjuvants that people were complaining about. Autism rates have went up since then, which completely disproves that they caused it. Pharmaceutical companies fund their own studies largely because most research into pharmaceuticals isn't profitable. Like the cancer industry, like cancer treatment industry is like a big one to look at, right? Like we haven't had a breakthrough in cancer like treatments in a long time. Most research into cancer development is unprofitable. So like if the pharmaceutical industry wasn't funding the research themselves, nobody else would, because that research, the investment, they're not going to return anything. It's simple ROI, right? Like in an economic sense, they're not going to do it. That's why pharmaceutical industries typically fund their own studies. The thing to look for isn't the funders. It's one, what journal it's posted into, if it's peer reviewed, and then the methodology, right? Like if it,
well,
go ahead.
But this kind of dodges the central point because what really happens in a lot of this stuff is lies of omission. It's like they're funding just specific things. And if something goes around or goes against that funding, they'll pull the grant money. So recently, and I don't know how much ties to this. It's just like, some bullshit example, like you have some sort of thing that isn't very much profit driven. Like, let's just, grant me and assume with me whether or not this is true, that like ivermectin and fenbendazole actually are these like amazing cancer treatments that have like gone, underappreciated for the last 30 years. Okay. Yeah. But the thing is that you can't make a lot of money off of ivermectin and fenbendazole because it's just like, very openly available. No pharmaceutical company is going to be invested in like trying to make profit off of that thing. So they're going to avoid it.
Right. Well, okay. So one, no. I mean, I get you were saying like assume. There's a lot of studies on ivermectin, right? So we know ivermectin wasn't effective for COVID. We know that it wouldn't be effective for things like cancer. But also there were cheap, I forget the name. It's like Duxa. I could look it up real quick. Something with a D, D-E-U-X, Duxa, something. There was a cheap over-the-counter alternative for COVID that was announced, right? So like the idea that it's all profit driven, I think doesn't pan out. But also just in the medical community, this is, to me, it seems like an argument for federal funding for medical research, which I might be wrong. It seemed like you were going to argue against, but then you would want the government funding these because that's how you would get funding for this kind of research that is separate from the pharmaceutical companies, right? But then that's also why we rely so much on our educational institutions, of which Trump is also pulling funding from in a vengeance-strucken move, it seems like. But we also rely on these education institutions to do a lot of research, independent of pharmaceutical companies and such. That way, it gives us these kind of multi-layered, peer-reviewed types of studies. And then even more so, you have to look at the global science community. Even if you want to say, well, in America, we're so profit-driven and all of this. Well, you can go to countries that have completely decommodified healthcare and medicines and all of this. And even their science studies, have the same results.
Well, I'm not, there's 1,000 variables to this. What I would say is, I think, to me, whenever you go back into the history of pharmaceutical financing for studies and stuff like that, do you know who like the major pioneer in this that got started this whole thing with universities and pharmaceutical companies contributing to research and everything like that? It was the Rockefeller, right?
Okay.
Like, have you looked into this?
I mean, I don't really do the conspiracy stuff a lot, but I've kind of heard the points people have made about it. I don't think that it matters much. I don't think funding...
So basically, well, no, it definitely matters because what happened was you had kind of in the early 1900s, you had kind of two branches of like, medical treatments kind of combating with each other. You had this homeopathic of like using natural things, and then you have this pharmaceutical petroleum synthesized faction. And the petroleum faction, with Rockefeller at its head, just completely dominated holistic treatment things. And
because they're a failure, like they fail across the board in most things.
Yeah, but what the synthetic thing is
especially
usually
like
a synthesis of a natural compound.
I don't know. Like, I mean that I don't know another way to say this. So like, don't take this as like disrespect, but like that sounds like quack science to me, you know, like I don't think that matters. Like there's lots of good science on this. And the core disagreement we're having here is when I look at a study, right? When I'm looking at data on a thing, the first thing I'm going to look at is the journal it was published in. The second thing I'm going to look at is if it was peer reviewed. The third thing I'm going to look at is the confidence interval, the sample size, the methodology, right? Funding is like one of the last things I would look at because who cares who funds it if it's good science? And then there's always other science. Like it's not like when we look at like if ivermectin maybe isn't a good one, but like COVID, right? It's not
like iron deficiency. Let's bring up iron deficiency because a lot of iron deficiency within women usually correlates to like some sort of vitamin C or vitamin D deficiency. And if you like solve that problem ahead of like, there's so many stories of women having iron deficiency, and then they started drinking a shitload of orange juice or taking vitamin C supplementation, and it just completely fixes their iron deficiency problem. And they're like,
so I'm not read up on iron deficiency specifically, but I know that the danger is applying causative effects to something that only has correlation, right? And it's kind of like what we're seeing what Trump and RFK are doing with like Tylenol and with vaccines and autism is it's a lot of taking correlation and trying to apply causation where it doesn't really exist.
Well, I think what RFK and this is probably a huge contentious argument between us. What RFK is showing is kind of what I'm saying is kind of the problem too. And I would highly encourage you to be a little bit more open-minded about this because you do see the problem obviously with politicians. You see like this lobby, this APAC as this being a problem. And what RFK is saying is that there are studies to support this, but all of them are going to be smaller studies. Well, I mean, there's a Harvard study that I forget what the other one was.
Wait, hold on. I am curious. Do you think there's something there? You think because
I don't know. I mean, I don't know enough about any of this.
Yeah.
All I'm saying, I'm just making the general point that what RFK is saying is that
it's ridiculous.
It's very hard for these studies to get peer reviews done on them. It's very hard for them to get funding on it because the pharmaceutical industries who are funding all the research won't fund these studies.
Well, no, a lot of it is because
these studies.
A lot of it is
they will take away your grant money.
Well, a lot of it is just because the science is bad, right? And like a credible journal isn't going to publish bad science, right? Like for instance, when RFK, he points to, this Tylenol study, right? It's a Dutch study, I think, or it might be Denmark. And he says, this is the study that proves Tylenol causes autism. What it actually shows is just correlation, right? Is that when Tylenol is taken, there is a correlative effect to babies being more likely to have autism. The problem here is when you then say, you take that and you say Tylenol causes autism. What could happen is it could be fevers. The fever that the mother has that she's taking the Tylenol for could cause the autism. It could be the pains. It could be this and that, right? The biggest problem, however, is that like we know for a fact that autism is developed prenatally. And it develops throughout the different stages of utero, right? All throughout birth. 94% of the genes that express autism are developed prenatally. And it's heavily genetic. And these are things that vaccines, the baby's gonna get vaccinated after birth. So that's just an entirely insane thing to even say. And that's kind of why I think they backed off of that and tried to pivot to Tylenol. But then Tylenol is also just a really dumb thing to point at too.
Well, I think one thing about this is that like the way RFK got involved in this in the first place was, all these mothers coming up and talking to him. And because there was this like connection, and they were bringing up the fact that there was these adjuvants within the vaccine, and they felt like these adjuvants were the problem. And he had been suing all of these companies, all these energy companies, for leaking mercury in the rivers. And so he had made like a career of like suing all these companies for leaking mercury in the rivers,
right,
and
which
causing
is
all these different environmental problems.
But that's
like,
also
hey,
just insane.
You're up on this mercury stuff. Like, I think there's a problem with the mercury, blah, blah, blah.
So do you know how long it's been since mercury was even used as an adjuvant in vaccines?
Yeah. No, I know it got removed. Yeah.
In 2001.
Sure.
And there was also never a causation shown there either. There's actually a lot of statistical evidence to point otherwise. And another good rate, actually, the last thing I'll say, and I'll let you go. Sorry, I don't mean to railroad you. But the last thing is, the biggest point is that once they removed mercury from these vaccines, when they also removed like aluminum, they removed a lot of these adjuvants that people were complaining about, autism rates have went up since then, which completely disproves that they caused it.
Well, hold on. No, you can't say that, because the way that the vaccines work is based on an adjuvant. So you have to have some sort of adjuvant for the vaccine to work. That's just like mechanically how vaccines work. You there's no adjuvant-free vaccine. That's not a thing.
Yeah, that's not true for MMR vaccines. I don't even know if mRNA.
Okay,
I don't know if mRNA vaccines.
We're not talking about MMRNA. We're not talking about that. We're talking about regular vaccines.
That's what I'm saying. MMR is like measles, mumps, rubella. These don't have adjuvants.
Oh,
these are live virus vaccines.
Hold on.
I don't know if the mRNA does. I don't know if the mRNA does, is what I'm saying, because but which would be COVID, right? If that's what you're talking about.
The mRNA does not have an adjuvant.
Yeah, and the MMR hasn't since they were removed in 2001.
No, I don't think you're correct. Well, I don't know. I'd have to double check about live virus. I mean, maybe the live virus does not have an adjuvant.
All MMR vaccines are live virus. Spike proteins are mRNA vaccines.